Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Achates live session on Thursday, the 9th of March. Today, we're going to be talking about prospect research. And given that we've had what is probably a record-breaking number of sign-ups for today's session, I think it's safe to say that this is a timely topic on which many of us across the sector are very keen to get some further insight and generate some fresh ideas. Our discussion today is going to be chaired by my colleague and fellow senior consultant, Helen Gaffney, and I'll be handing over to Helen in just a few moments. To introduce myself, my name's Phoebe Walker and I'm a senior consultant here at Achates, specialising in research. Achates is a creative consultancy with a holistic approach to fundraising, strategy and recruitment, and we work right across the cultural sector. Although we acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, we believe that the breadth of our overview and the detail in our approach gives us what we think is a really valuable insight, enabling us to support the sector in as many ways as we can. This particular platform, Achates Live, was set up as part of that supportive approach to bring fundraisers and other arts professionals together to discuss key topics and also to enable you to help and support one another. So today's session is, of course, focused on prospect research. And in this hyper-information, sometimes misinformation age, the sheer amount of data out there can sometimes feel overwhelming. As prospect researchers, whether seasoned or starting out, it can often be challenging just working out where to start and where to stop. So among other things, we'll be thinking about how we can use prospect research in the most focused and efficient ways to shape our pipelines and inform our development strategies. Now, today, we're lucky enough to be joined by two esteemed panellists who've both invested in prospect research with Achates, and together we're going to reflect on what our work has enabled and how they're using prospect research in their fundraising methodologies today. So I'm welcoming Sal Sherritt, Director of Philanthropy and Commercial at World Heartbeat Academy. Hi, Sal. And Cheryl Jones, Director of Grand Union.
Hi, sorry.
Hi, Sal. And Cheryl.
Hello.
Hi,
Hello.
welcome to you both. So Sal has worked in the arts since 2005. Her varied career has taken her from a university museum to producing theatre, to national youth music events, to her current role at World Heartbeat, a South London-based music academy. Here she's developed the organisation's fundraising team and led Apace on their capital project to open a new music education centre, concert hall and recording studios in 9 Elms, southwest London. That venue launched in November 2022, following a successful fundraising campaign for £3.6 million, and funds were raised from across the funding mix, including securing 6-figure gifts from individuals. And Sal believes that prospect research was vital for that campaign. Cheryl Jones is director and one of the founding members of Grand Union, a gallery and artist studios complex in Digbeth, Birmingham. Since 2009, she has successfully developed Grand Union from a voluntary-run collective of artists and curators to an Arts Council England national portfolio organisation and CIO. She is now leading the organisation through a major capital project that will transform Junction Works, a beautiful mid-19th century Grade 2 listed canal building in Digbeth, into a vibrant centre for the presentation and production of contemporary art. Cheryl is also a member of the West Midlands Combined Authority Cultural Leadership Board, with a key focus on cultural infrastructure and the freelance cultural workforce. She also has a range of experience in curating and project management, both freelance and at institutions such as the New Art Gallery Walsall, and she's been a key collaborator in developing initiatives such as Digbeth First Friday and Birmingham Art Map. So Sal and Cheryl, again, a very warm welcome to you both. Now, as I mentioned, today's session is going to be chaired by Helen, who's going to start by giving us some further context for today's discussion, and then Helen will lead off the conversation with our panel today. I'm going to be back to join you at the end with some questions from the audience, from yourselves, so please do send these over by the chat function as we go along, and our General Manager, Victoria, will ensure that those are picked up and passed over to me. And finally, just to confirm, all of the information shared today is live and correct at the time of broadcast. So Helen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Phoebe, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more from Sal and Cheryl. It's an exciting moment for prospect research as we think about identifying new sources of funding for culture and the value that culture brings about for its communities. I started my career as a prospect researcher, and it's informed my approach as a fundraiser ever since, making decisions grounded in data and evidence. We know it's a competitive landscape for funding currently, and that over the last few years, political, economic and social factors have all influenced the grant-making strategies of both statutory funding sources as well as those traditional trust funders, whilst of course these same factors will have impacted corporate and individual support too. It is indeed a moment of change, and many cultural organisations are thinking about building a pipeline of prospective supporters, and perhaps that pipeline is longer term than they've previously planned for. Organisations might also be looking at identifying new sources of funding for the first time, thinking perhaps about individual giving or corporate support when they perhaps haven't before, or sharpening their focus from these existing sources. However, cultural organisations have of course met moments of change before. And our panellists today both have experience of planning for major change, which, as they'll reflect with you, are recognised as capital projects. Now, whilst a capital project is, of course, a very particular project for an organisation, there is much we can learn from the associated diligent planning required to ensure that a change in the way that you work is managed through preparation, planning, and a long-term view. Prospect research plays a key role in this work, and when recognised as an evidence base, can start to answer questions when you're thinking about what next. In the US, prospect research has a stronger profile in fundraising than it does here in the UK, and we might assume that this is because they have, of course, had a very different model when it comes to statutory funding over the years. About 10 years ago, I was lucky enough to be granted a bursary to go to the American APRA conference, which leads the way in sharing international prospect research best practice. What I learned that whilst their systems, tools and processes were very technical, at its heart, good prospect research always enables relationships to thrive. And what we know, of course, is that fundraising is always underpinned by good, strong, trusted relationships. What we also know is that prospect research also supports the charity's legal duty to fundraise professionally and with diligence and care. By taking a proactive approach to developing your income model, good prospect research will enable you to deliver your organisational vision, mission and purpose based in evidence, while also giving you the tools to empower your organisation to fundraise with confidence. Now I'm going to hand over to Sal firstly to share a little bit more about her experiences with prospect research.
Hi there. I've done a fair bit of prospect research over the years, but really I'm going to really focus on my last campaign at World Heartbeat. To set the context, it was a small charity working out the upstairs of a rented warehouse in Wandsworth when I joined. They'd never had any in-house fundraising, and having very brilliantly won themselves a new space in a competitive tender with 42 other organisations, they weren't really entirely sure how they were going to move forward with the fundraising, and the initial attempt at the campaign hadn't gone as well as hoped. So I sort of came in and had to really start dealing with this things apace, and prospect research has really been a really vital tool, because in an arts organisation that hadn't got any ticketing database, any kind of prior history of kind of loyalty and spend, and very few clues, you really had quite a and very little track record of raising any significant gifts. It seemed a bit daunting to kind of work out where we were going to find some of the money for the campaign. So it was a bit of a blended approach, I suppose. So I started off by the big thing is, who are you going to prospect research if you decide that prospect research might be valuable? Obviously, your trustees, but I started to talk through the people that everyone talks about as being wealthy, and the person that seems to have been friends forever with the organisation in a lowercase f, and looking also at the kind of people of notoriety that have supported other local arts organisations. And so I kind of built a kind of whole plethora of people to have a look at. And I think what it really kind of showed was, you can start to, when you're doing your planning, your strategy, your gift tables, what do we think the scope is for individual giving as part of this campaign? where do we best plant our resources, given, you know, you've got sort of resources usually, and you've got a lot of money to get very fast. What really is the value potentially of that person that you're looking at? Actually, quite often it might not be the major gift. Quite often it's their connections and the route to a major gift that is really valuable. Sometimes it's stopping other people in the organisation insisting that you should spend an awful long time taking certain people out to lunch that are never going to give you anything. Yeah, and so the work I did, and with Helen specifically, was, you know, it looked at both people's capacity to give, but also their propensity to give, their connections, and their areas of interest, which helps you sort of formulate in the early stages whether or not you're going to talk to them about music or the value of education, or sort of angling your ask. And what I really found was that despite it definitely did bring about gifts. There were definitely people like on our trustees who, or ex-trustees, that didn't realise that so and so on their board had a family foundation. They just, you know, you ask people to open their contact books and they don't actually know a lot about those people, and they wouldn't necessarily have the confidence to introduce you because they're kind of like, well, I don't know if they could afford to give you a gift. If you can say to a trustee, they're known to have supported a number of other major arts organisations, you know, that gives confidence to others to open that door. I definitely, and so it was a matter of prioritising. I found my way into trusts and foundations, and some of the trustees on trustee boards. I ended up finding people who we didn't know were wealthy, who gave a gift, but then ended up doing an event with their wealthy friends in their penthouse in Chelsea for me. And then we got some more gifts and some more people. So it really, really has been hugely valuable, a mix of not looking at some people, making sure we're prioritising some, finding, and not just finding donations, but finding connections. And the other thing, I think, the only thing I'm really mindful is, and I've always been very passionate about the Achates Philanthropy Prize, is this business of, you know, actually we do need to we need to make the pool bigger. I think the only caveat to prospect research is you tend to be looking at people that are already known to be involved in the arts. So if you're trying to find new wealth, or in an area where there hasn't been a history of kind of giving. But then I think, you know, I did find people where, you know, I'd get a coffee with somebody, or a building site tour. And although Helen might have not said this person might know this, and this person, I might have thought, yeah, that person's really into visual art, and I know I'm after this person who's had been on the board of, I don't know, the National Portrait Gallery. So I do speculative asks, which weren't totally speculative anymore because I'd kind of got wider information. So I suppose that's kind of flavour of what I was doing, but I can't recommend it enough. I think, bluntly, you know, if you look at return on investment, if you spent £5,000 on prospect research and then you got one gift of 50k, it's made as money. So do you know what I mean? I think it's a really good odds, really, with prospect research.
Thank you so much, Sal. And yeah, some really, I remember when we started that project and thinking about where do we start? And I think some really interesting reflections on what the value of that research is. Of course, what we'll always think about at Achates is thinking about that kind of affinity, wealth and propensity to give. So it's thinking about, why are they connected to your organisation? What's a proportionate gift? But what's the other value that they might be able to draw for you? Is it networks, or is it something else entirely? So some really interesting reflections, and I know we'll have some questions around that. So thank you so much. Cheryl, I wonder if we could ask you to share where you are with your prospect research.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for that, Sal. We're right at the beginning of our journey, so it's really useful and reassuring to hear that, you know, the prospect research has paid off for you. So yeah, we're a much smaller scale organisation, and we are currently based in a warehouse and in the midst of a capital project to try and get a new venue together for for our organisation. I thought I'd just give a bit of background on our core activities, because I think actually they're really relevant to the way that we will prospect. Like our core activities are that we support and make space for artists to make and present artistic work. We make opportunities for people to experience and learn about art and get involved in art making. And we try and be a good neighbour in our locality, and we actively collaborate with the people that live and work nearby to improve our local environment and place. And these activities happen both in our venue but also in places across the city. And we consider art making in many different forms. So as well as having Black artist studios and a gallery space for exhibitions, we look for ways for art and life to really intersect. Just as a little example, last night we had a public talk about a project we've been doing called Field Commissions. And one of the artists described it as a social sculpture, which is a really nice term. And that's because the key part of the project has involved bringing together a group of people that includes artists and scientists, environmental activists, and local residents and students to activate a piece of land next to the canal, which we've adopted. And so, like, as a result of our various strands of work, of which there are many, we've got lots of different relationships with different communities and partners, and they create a really rich and interconnected network of people with different knowledges, backgrounds and experiences. And I guess we've worked with Achates very recently in the last 6 months to help us form an updated fundraising strategy, predominantly for our capital project, which Phoebe mentioned in the introduction. And I think that what this prospecting research has really revealed to us, in essence, is that our approach to our core activity, our artistic activity, is also the way we should be approaching our fundraising. So yeah, we're making these opportunities for collaboration and developing a kind of network of people. And it's this social and cultural capital that funders and philanthropists are interested in supporting. You know, they want to get involved and be part of that story. And because of the work we already do, we've got an amazing network of advocates to build out from. So the prospects research has been really invaluable kind of starting point for us to think about this huge task that we have ahead, to raise several £1 million to redevelop a building and create a really secure and accessible hub for our community's work. And the thorough prospects research that Achates did for us really summarises the current challenging funding landscape out there, as we all know, but also contextualises how we sit within that and takes account of our previous fundraising successes and failures. And the research then really scopes out the types of funders that are most likely to be interested in our work and context. The other thing that Achates really laid out quite frankly for us is the sort of impossibility of us being able to undertake such a large project from our current starting point. So actually they've created a combined fundraising strategy for us that focuses on increasing our revenue funding and then helps us build the right foundations to undertake this larger capital fundraising campaign, and how those things really work in tandem. So, you know, that means building funding for our core funding and our staff capacity, but it also highlights which funders we can prioritise and build relationships with through our artistic work. And so it's not cheap to get this sort of consultancy for organisations our size, but as Sal mentioned, it's completely invaluable because we just don't have the capacity in our team to be able to do this level of thorough research and set out this plan. And I think what I really like about it being done outside of in-house as well, is really brutally honest in explaining the methods and the funders which are high risk and why, and how our organisation's limitations might affect those outcomes, and sort of it helps us to understand where the gaps are and how we can create a plan to kind of address those. And then that means we can be more organised as a staff team, but also direct our trustees with more confidence and effectiveness and make the most of the amazing resource that they are. I know that you want to go into the questions about where we're at this stage, but I just thought very quickly I'd say that behind the scenes we're now rallying our staff on board to form a new development committee that will help bring some external members in as like official advocates of Grand Union and help to extend our networks and our circle of influence. We're really thinking about our networks and who our key supporters are and who they're then networked with. And we're really thinking about our communication strategy. So analysing like how well it's known out there, this like social value that we have, as well as our cultural value, and how we can push that out further.
Super, thank you so much, Cheryl. And I'm glad that some of that brutal honesty landed well. At Achates, we like to think that we are an organisation that tells the truth, and I think sometimes that frankness can be quite challenging, but I think that's absolutely sometimes where prospect research lays that evidence base. So I'm glad that you're still smiling through the brutal honesty. I've got a few questions I'd love to explore with you both, and I think to kick off, you've both touched on this a little bit, Cheryl in particular, you just at the end there. And I think one of the things I'm always struck with when I start a prospect research project is thinking there's kind of the big names that everyone wants to reach, but actually, is that who your organisation is equipped to reach? And I think one of the conversations I often start thinking about is, who does your board know? Who does your advocates know? Who does your circle and your network know? And I think what it often is a useful lever is thinking about what's that first kind of circle or sphere of influence, and what does that layer of fundraising or support look like? And I think what I'd love to understand from you both, and Sal, I might come to you first if I may, is thinking about, how has prospect research enabled you to activate your board or your network of advocates? And you did touch on this a little bit, but I'm really interested in hearing a little bit more around kind of what did that activation look like?
Firstly, I think you talk to your board as a board of trustees. I actually think that when you start to do this kind of work, and I might be just saying the obvious, but I'm just going to say from the gut, is that you need to work individually with trustees, because effectively what you're trying to access is their personal networks, and this is a personal conversation, and you need to engender their trust, and you need to have a depth of conversation that I don't think works on mass. This isn't kind of fundraising by kind of committee, as much as committees can be very useful as a think tank and for strategizing. Actually, individual donor work, I think, really needs a really personal touch. And I think you've touched upon trust and about how you can build that trust, and you need to effectively cultivate your trustees and advisors as you would cultivate your prospects. And I think that's crucial. With my trustees, I think it's a bit like the brutal honesty. There are those that are there that have a massive asset to your board, but bluntly, it becomes quite clear they have really not got the networks that you necessarily need for a particular task. They may have amazing networks to help you with artistic development or accessing education. It's not to diss their networks, it's just for that task. So I think it helps you focus. I think it helps you potentially really nicely, stop spending too much on wine and canapes for random people that are being brought along that actually you spend a lot of time talking to, and you realise that very kind but slightly misguided trustees think that they're being helpful, or they need to be seen to be bringing people. You can just be structured and be focused without offence, I think. And the people that really do have good networks, you can talk to them with give them a bit more confidence. I mean, I never really kind of bring out this person has a capacity of 4 on our rating and rank. I never get into the gritty fundraising detail, but you can talk to them, as I mentioned earlier, about saying, well, do you know so-and-so? Oh, yeah, well, we thought you might know them from when you were on the board of so-and-so. Did you know that they were a big fund giver to an X campaign at so-and-so? This is information that is quite in the public sphere usually. You're not having to suggest that you're make them feel uncomfortable that you're kind of minding their inside leg. And, yes, so it did really, both ex-trustees and current trustees, I would say, recent ex-trustees. And I think also, I ended up getting a 6-figure donation from a trustee. I mean, candidly, I mean, we knew full well that they had capacity when we brought them onto our board, and they had connections, and they have been immensely helpful. But I think them sort of starting to get to understand the fact that there is structure and method, and they know why you might want to talk to that person, because actually you just want to get to talk to that person because you think that they might know some people on the board of so and so. That it's not always about, we need you to ask your friend for 10 grand, you know what I mean? And also not going straight for the ask. Like, that's another thing. Trustees that shoot off trying to be too helpful and come back and with £2,000 check from somebody you were hoping to ask for 50,000. I mean, it just helps you take them on a journey, I think.
Super. Thank you so much, Sal. And I think it is really interesting, isn't it? I know I've definitely been in conversations in my fundraising career where the evidence hasn't pointed out what people had hoped it might show. It basically says we're pointing in the wrong direction. Let's look at this contact that nobody had really thought about. So I think it is interesting when that kind of prospect-based evidence shows you something that you perhaps weren't expecting.
And people do leap and think, I need to find someone who's going to give you some money. Actually, possibly not. Maybe you just need to introduce me to somebody else who can then introduce me to someone else who gives me the big check. You know what I mean? I think it's just about kind of, calming people down and taking them on that journey.
Yes, being rational. And
then drinking wine afterwards.
Cheryl, you touched on this briefly as well in thinking about how prospect research has helped inform how you're thinking about a development committee, I think you mentioned. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to share around what that's looked like in terms of who might have been recruited to those particular committees and why you made those choices.
Yeah, sure. I guess it's that, like, we've got an amazing board, but there are only a certain number of people. So I think the development committee is a way of us like increasing our capacity to develop our network. So we have got some board members on that committee, but we've invited some external people. So we've got somebody from the Combined Authority, for example, somebody who's a development manager for another organisation, somebody who's a fundraiser in another arts organisation. So they start to kind of increase our knowledge and our capacity and our networks into other arenas that we don't have access to at the moment. I think that's the most important part of that. And again, just going on from what Sal was saying, like bringing people on that journey and getting them to fall in love with our work first is the sort of thing that we're trying to do, and really develop our communication strategies. So it's not just about how we're marketing our work to the public, but how we're telling those stories to different people in our networks too.
It's quite funny, sorry to chip in, I was going to say, I didn't have a development committee on any of my campaign, and it's not because I think it's wrong. It's just, in the end, I was just like, I don't know, I want to service a committee. I think I did have people that were kind of a committee, but I went down the road of just working with them as individual sort of senior volunteers. And I just chipping that in to say, I think there's more than one model of how people do it, but yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's again thinking about that rationality of, with limited resources and capacity, where do you put, where can you put your focus? So no, absolutely, really interesting to hear both your approaches on that. I guess I'd love to think about prospect research and kind of knowing organizations have limited investment, and thinking about how do you know where to start and where to stop. And I think it's interesting to think about kind of, I know I've got my own thoughts on kind of what's useful to start with, but that looks really different for a range of organizations. Some organizations, large theatre companies will have really sophisticated box office systems where you can be sort of thinking about what does that data represent. Whereas I'll work with much smaller organizations and I say, where have you got into, what does your prospect list look like? And it really is back of an envelope, here's some 10 names we've been thinking about. So I'm used to looking at a range of different ways that we might start to get going and thinking about who do you know and how might you connect to other prospects. But I guess, Cheryl, if I might come to you first, to think about kind of how did you know where to kind of start thinking where to start and stop on your prospect research?
I don't know if we did. But I guess, like I said, we started with the network that we already had and trying to identify people within that. And then you know, understanding that we needed to bring in some extra knowledge and expertise on that. So you're bringing yourselves in and bringing previous fundraising consultants in before that. And then this development committee is the next stage of that. And that's where we're going to focus our activity for the next year. But I'm sure that as we continue on this journey, you know, that prospecting won't stop, it will continue. But I think the key for us is making sure that we've got a laser focus on our plan and what we need to address. And you know, that will change as we go, I'm sure. But yeah, the focus is the key for us at the moment.
Great, thank you so much. And Sal, in your position where you've come really to the end of that capital campaign, I guess, but you're thinking, I get about the long-term resilience of World Heartbeat and what that looks like. So I guess, have you been able to draw a line under it, or are you thinking about kind of future prospects as kind of that much bigger program unfolds?
You know, it's quite funny. So, I mean, one of the things at the end of any capital campaign is actually, you know, well, for us, you're either thrown into having a bigger building, or we have 2 buildings. So it's like operational revenue panic now. And final settlements with builders and various things. I think that, you know, it's the same with your grant funding. You're always thinking about what the period of capital fundraising and the relationships you've built through that and how you take those forward at the end of that. But at the same time, I find it quite a delicate beast, because you've also potentially maxed out a lot of the current asks, and you don't kind of want to wear out goodwill, and people want a period of a little bit of return on their generosity. So firstly, obviously, that's through your launches and your opening events. And now I'm sort of feeling like, you know, when you kind of get it on the fundraising pipeline and you kind of get to successful ask, and then the good old theory says you kind of go back and you start working along again. And I think the only slightly edgy feeling is you feel like you're taking a huge posse of them back a bit to start recultivating them for the next phase of asks. So obviously we've become a concert venue in our instance for the first time. So I'm trying to bring people to concerts, but I'm now having conversations with the team and trying to put in, you know, we still don't want to lose that DNA about being a young people's organisation. And sorry, got people walking in. I'm on a live event, sorry. So I'm in the artist green room, as you are, to find a spot. Trying to think about making sure they remain engaged with the young people's work and the young people directly. So I feel like I'm doing a lot of cultivating. I have recently done a bursaries campaign, which has been quite successful and enabled us to kind of bring in unrestricted revenue, and you suddenly move into other forms of donation. What I think really we need as an organisation, apart from, is now thinking about having a decent patron scheme. So that is something, when you only have an education side, it's sometimes hard to give people the experiences and the hospitality and the things you bring along with those schemes. So that's on my agenda. And I really feel, and we now have a ticketing system for the first time, so they'll be moving into a phase of looking at if there is new behaviour and patterns in bookers and donors online with tickets that can start to be looked at as potential prospects, and maybe another phase of prospect research to look at some of those. Yeah, lots to do. I mean, personally, I'm now also commercial director, so I'm setting up a recording studio business and a commercial hires business. I'm actually feeling like one of my first jobs is I need to recruit a philanthropy manager. And because you realise you're suddenly very under-resourced. So at the moment, one of my jobs is to find some fundraising for another post. But yeah, that's our personal story. But in terms of, yeah, I think you are continuing to then start to look at new pools and making sure you keep the goodwill of all those people you have and work out what it is that the next ask is going to be, and yeah, how do you continue to solicit gifts.
Absolutely. It's so fascinating to hear how both of you, your work and your programme and your community around it is growing. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass to Phoebe because I know we've got lots of questions coming in. So over to you, Phoebe.
Great, thanks, Helen. So one of the first questions we have is, this is really about, I think, tools and resources, so a nice practical one. How do you find the information on board members? And this could obviously go across many different types of prospects. How do you find the information on board members, on history on other boards, or where they've worked, who they know, how they know them? Is this Google? Is this LinkedIn? What are the kind of the tools and resources that you both like to use? Cheryl, maybe if I come to you first.
A bit of all of those. Yeah, I mean, it's a mixture, isn't it, of doing your own research, but also talking to people and really talking to the networks that you already have, because often they'll have a wealth of information on different people. But yeah, like LinkedIn is a really useful tool as well. And then obviously when us working with consultants like Achates, you have knowledge of different people as well that might be interested in getting involved.
Great, thank you. Sal, do you have any particular tools or networks that you like to draw on?
Well, the biggest thing is, as a time poor fundraiser, I could do a bit of Google and LinkedIn. There's no substitute to talking to people, but that is where one of the biggest values of prospect research is, because there are a whole set of, whether it's Factari fee, whether it's a huge number of different lists and databases. This is where the professional prospect research comes in, because you can get a lovely spreadsheet back which suggests all the people that you might usefully know, or you can ask for an in-depth profile. So I basically did a kind of, you can go wide or you can go deep with things. So I kind of went wide and kind of got high level kind of one-liner on lots of people that I kind of had tagged up through instinct, knowledge, previous behaviours and relationships. And then once I'd started working on those, or I'd secured a meeting and I needed to go in there and feel confident I could have that conversation with that prospect the first time, I'd come back and commission extra and more in-depth dives on particular people. And in terms of the tools, this is where I don't have to worry necessarily about all the tools, because I've kind of gone to a professional agency who's got them.
Thanks, Sal. And sort of, I think following on from that, someone else has asked whether you could say a bit more, you mentioned this earlier, about grading prospects and what kind of process you follow, whether that's a kind of a full grading them, or kind of how you do that.
Again, sorry, chipping in, you can have multiple ways of ranking, and you can have an overall ranking score essentially, but it can look at a mix of wealth and propensity to give, and whether how warm or cold we think they might be to your offer, your organisation. But the science between how those numbers and statuses are sort of worked out has been the skill again of the prospect researcher.
Yeah, that's the same for us. I mean, ours is more about trusts and foundations actually, and how we develop relationships with them. And yeah, Achates has helped us develop a kind of sheet of people that are more likely to be interested in our work, and which ones are more risky and which ones aren't, and really kind of focusing on building that relationship with them, and starting off with small grants to support our programme, that then will help to lead up to a larger ask at a later stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's coming out of this a lot is that all the information is out there. This is all stuff that really is pretty much all of it in the public domain. It's finding the efficiencies of getting the information that you need, resource and time intensive to do that, to pull that together into your prospect research in a way that is efficient and is commensurate with the resources of your organisation. I've got just one or two more, I think. Cheryl, I think you touched on this earlier on, but the point you made about understanding that the way you went about research kind of needed to mirror your broader organisational strategy and the way that you approach and talk to your audiences as well. I suppose I'm interested in thinking about, we know how prospect research can inform kind of broader development strategy, fundraising strategy, but also whether it has a role to play in informing broader organisational strategy, kind of the direction of your organisation as a whole as well.
Yeah, I think yeah, just sort of recognizing that methodology is not just about programs, it's about the whole organization and how we yeah, develop financially, economically, but also in terms of the people that we connect with across the city. Sorry, can you repeat the question again? I've lost my thread a little bit.
Glad you said that.
No worries. It was about how in prospect research, in understanding that it needs to mirror your kind of wider, more holistic organisational approach to your audiences and to your work. Does it have an impact on organisational strategy in that way? Do you think, or have you seen it from the work maybe that you've done with Achates on how that's kind of informing your broader organisational approach as well?
Yeah, I think, you know, going back to that focus again, I think like in making a sort of roadmap for fundraising, actually it's not just about fundraising, it's about the whole thing, like how all of our activities intersect with each other. So how our communications is about promoting our program, but actually it's about promoting our values and the things that we do beyond just the artistic program, and that helps to develop relationships that all feed back into funding. But you know, also it's sort of helping us think about like, I'm struggling to think of the right word, but like formalizing isn't quite the word that I'm looking for, but really putting lots of structures in place that we haven't had before, that's helping us work more efficiently and helping us to work more smartly with the limited resources that we have.
Sal, do you have anything on kind of prospect research and strategy more broadly to add?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in really simplistic terms, I don't ever think that fundraising should let the tail wag the dog, i.e. I just don't think, because, you know, yeah, if we did more, you know, posh classical work, then we might get more funding. We might do, but then you've got to retain true to your ethics. So I think what's really most interesting about it is to try and understand who's out there that could be of interest, and how you articulate that, and how you talk about impact. I mean, we've done a huge theory of change project alongside our campaign, and coming out of it as well, like developing business planning. You know, I think it gives you, as a fundraiser or someone leading the fundraising conversation with an organisation, gravitas and respect when you're actually being able to sort of make sure that the structure and articulation and, you know, the direction of programs, we understand how they might be fundable, and just that kind of, and that there's not mission creep. I mean, I think that's the other really big thing you get from these kind of programs, as long as you kind of have a real senior voice. And I think, you know, it's why fundraisers need senior representation. I think there was a lot of years where they were kind of seen as the kind of nasty money people, and that they weren't, you know, in the right level of role in organisations, because I think it is really critical that we don't just have these pipe dreams and don't know how we're going to get from A to B. It's effectively a really core leg of business planning.
Great, thank you. I think kind of one sort of final one that we have, if you're a small organisation and you are really limited on your resources and you're not able to commission much in the way of prospect research, what would your best advice be on kind of where to start, where to set parameters if you are really strapped, but do you want to undertake some kind of focused, efficient research?
Do you want to go, Sal, or should I?
I don't know, because we didn't have much money either, and I was just thinking, I'm sorry, I'm a great believer within, you know, if you've got no money, you've got no money, but at the end of the day, you are speculating to accumulate. And I think what you can always do is not do a massive project, but kind of do something, you know, just getting your trustees prospect mapped isn't an expensive exercise in its first instance. You know, maybe treat something as a test. Don't try and do all the prospect mapping you could do for your organisation. unless you can, you know, I do think it's good value for money. I think the returns are great.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be a large scale project, does it? As you said, you know, even if maybe you could get a consultant for a day to start that process and give you some pointers as to where to go and who to speak to, I think is a valuable thing to do.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I think, unless there are any more coming in from the audience, that we might be about ready to wrap up our conversation for today. So it remains for me to say a huge thank you to our brilliant panelists, Sal and Cheryl, for a brilliant, really insightful, really useful, kind of practically useful discussion. And thank you, of course, very much to Helen for chairing that as well. As you know, at Achates, we offer a range of services, including recruitment, fundraising, strategy, and organisational development. So if you would like to discuss with us how we might be able to support you, or if you'd just like to speak to a member of our team to find out more, then we'd love to hear from you. Please just drop us a line. We're at info@achates.org.uk, and you can also go to our website to find out more as well. For just to note, we will be having another Achates live session. That's going to be on Thursday, the 13th of April. There'll be more details to follow on that soon, including the topic for that Achates live session. So please keep an eye on your inbox for that. And for now, I'll just say thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you again to our panelists, and we look forward to seeing you in April. Bye for now.